Well, really delighted to have in the studio with us today Allan Lee. He's with Shine TV, our colleague over in New Zealand, and he's got an incredible background in broadcasting. We want to talk to him about where Christian media is and what's going, especially how he serves in that capacity there with Shine TV in New Zealand. But before all of that, this guy was in the UK and he trafficked around over there with the BBC?
Yep, BBC.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, how did you get into broadcasting?
I trained as an
engineer.
short story. Yeah, the short story. I trained as an engineer, and one day I was working in the studio on the other side of the glass there, and the guy who was supposed to come in and do the voiceover didn't turn up. Oh. And so I said, look, I'll do it. I'll go in and give you a guide track, and then we can get the real guy in later on. And the client said, oh, actually, I quite like that voice. We'll keep that. And once my boss realised that I was saleable, I found myself doing more and more on that side of the glass, and eventually from there went into radio, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Well, and how long were you with the BBC?
10 years altogether. I had about 6-7 years with commercial radio, and then I joined BBC television. So.
And in that capacity, you've had quite a variety of experiences of interviewing people. Yeah,
I've been. I guess it's one of the things about working with the BBC is you end up doing all sorts of things. Yeah. And a couple of times I met Princess Diana, Princess of Wales. That was interesting. The second time we were covering the opening of a hospital, and so I was equipped with a radio pack on my back, and so I had the microphone, and we were all doing this live. And as I walked through the door, the new construction of the building cut my radio signal off completely.
With all the metal in there.
Absolutely, nothing there, just coming out. So my colleague who was outside was padding frantically while I was trying to find some way of getting. So every time I saw an open window, I rushed to it and stuck my bottom out of it so that the aerial hung out. So we managed to get through this outside broadcast, but eventually the princess noticed that the man from the BBC, every time he saw a window, rushed to it and hung out of it. Yeah. And she came and she said, I have to ask you what you're doing. Yeah. And I said, my radio pack, and she just knew. So she was good fun.
Was she down to earth?
Very. She surprised me at how normal she was, because one of the things I found was that if you had talked to her, even if you were a member of the press, and you spoke to her, you were hounded by other members of the press for a couple of days afterwards. Oh wow! Which I found quite intimidating. And I thought,
so the paparazzi going after the paparazzi?
Oh yeah, I know, it's really scary, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah. But she somehow managed to be quite pleasant with people, and she had that pressure all the time, which was terrifying.
It's pretty. Now, did you cover her death?
I was in New Zealand by the time that happened, but
boy, that must have been quite an emotional thing for you after meeting her.
It was, and also I was a strange day, because I was actually the duty editor in the radio news service I was working for then. And I was called when the first reports came through, so I went into work early, and I was on when the announcement came through that she had been killed. And then it was just madness after that. It was so busy because, of course, you know, there was a huge amount to do, and I didn't really get a chance to think about it until I got home. That night, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning when I finally got home. Wow. And my wife was there, and I took one look at her and burst into tears, which, you know, for a news guy is unusual. But I think it was just that huge
the shock.
And I hadn't had a chance to think about it, and suddenly it all happened at once at 4 o'clock in the morning when you're at your lowest anyway. So it was.
Well, how did you get into Christian broadcasting? What drew you from the BBC to? I mean, there must be another story in here. I'm not getting it.
I became a Christian when I was a teenager. And I had always been interested in broadcasting, and so the engineering was sort of the start of that. And I had the way it works in Britain is there's no such thing as, or up until recently, there's no such thing as theDove, because Christian broadcasters are banned, but the secular broadcasters have have to do something. So they have to do what they call a God slot. And so I was doing sort of normal programming, but I would do the God slot as well as I was the station's token Christian. It's actually where I met my wife, because she was the station's other token Christian, and so we ended up doing the religious program together. But so I had always had that interest, but I was just working in secular media, and then one day the CEO at RBG, which is the affiliate of the Dove over in New Zealand, poached me. And I found myself working for New Zealand's Rhema and for Shine TV.
All right, so you moved over there, Auckland, and you are our counterpart there with the Shine. In fact, I have to say to our Dove viewing and listening audience, if it wasn't for the relationship that we have with Shine TV, I doubt that we had been on the air when we got on the air. Of course, we reached over and cherry-picked one of your best people.
I've nearly forgiven you for that. Yeah.
Well, we're still asking for absolution for that one. But we brought Michael Brown in, which is, the rest is history there. But that relationship and that collaboration continues. We have shared material back and forth. And but here we are today in this thing called Christian media. And you probably, like me, have watched it go from its beginning stages today, where it's really quite impacting. And it's changed, too. The way we do news, the way we're doing stories, it's really changed, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think, in some ways, I think we've come of age, because I think when Christian broadcasting started, it was often a bit shaky.
Right.
And really, you had to be quite committed to watch it. But I think now that a lot of the programs that go out, they hold their own against what's coming from the secular media. And I think the fact that I think our approach to news as a Christian broadcaster is slightly different, in that we're not swayed particularly by celebrity and personality. The stories that we tend to concentrate are the ones that are important to people. And I think audiences often recognise, even audiences that have no particular faith background of their own.
Right.
I think they recognise that many Christian broadcasters are the place where you will get the news, and it's truth, and it's honest, and it's balanced, and I think in many ways that's a responsibility that as Christian broadcasters we have.
Well, we have gone from preaching and teaching and interviewing people to where the Christian media services today are full-blown. I mean, the news component to what we do is a big part of what we do. It's a very expensive part of what we do. But on the other hand, it's a service that we provide. Now, if we have a bias, it's because we want to present the biblical worldview. But at the same time, we're not pounding you with negative stuff. We're looking for the way to, everybody understands the world's upside down. What's the answer to it?
I think that's, it always surprises me when I see a story that's being covered. I mean, if we cover a story at home, I watch the way our national networks cover it, and then I watch the way we've covered it. And quite often it will be quite different, because I think often the secular media look for the negative, because that's often, if you look for conflict, that makes good television.
Right.
Whereas we're actually not looking for conflict, we're looking for an answer, which gives you a different look to the whole thing.
Well, that was emphasized this past week. As you know, the late Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher passed away, and I want to get your comments on that. But I purposely came home that night, and I turned on all of the network televisions in America. I wanted to see how they were going to cover this story, and I was amazed about how they didn't cover it. Which was so amazing to me. And in one case, one of the networks didn't even get to the story until like after the first break. So there is seemingly not only an agenda, but a bias that we see now on some of the network television. And I think we Christians are saying, wait a minute, what's impacting to a life, and what is the God perspective of that story? We're going to take a break. When we come back, I do want to get your comments. Did you ever interview the Prime Minister?
No, I had one of my friends interviewed her and lost.
And lost?
Yes.
What happened? Quickly.
He threw a curveball question at her, and she just shut him down.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. Hey, Allan Lee's with us from Shine TV in New Zealand. We're going to be joined by our own Steve Johnson coming up next year on Focus Today. Okay, we're back, and we've been joined by our own Steve Johnson, and we're talking to Allan Lee. He's our special guest this week here at the Dove TV. He's visiting from Shine TV, our affiliate there in New Zealand. Prior to that, he worked for the BBC. We'll forgive him. But actually, there was a time when I first went to UCB UK in Stoke-on-Trent. On the wall there was the original mission statement of the BBC. Do you remember?
Yes,
do you remember reading it?
I can't quote it, but it was the guy who really was the founding father of the BBC, Lord Reith, came from a very strong Scottish Presbyterian background, and his mantra was, we had to educate, inform, and entertain. And he had a very strong Christian ethic, and in some ways, a lot of what the BBC does. The reputation for honesty and for trying to report it straight.
But the original mission statement, I think the last line said, was to propagate the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I have gone online trying to find the original mission statement. It's nowhere to be found.
I bet they've rubbed it out.
Well, we're talking about how news is presented today, and Steve, you're obviously very involved in it, and tell us what you look for when you go for a story. How do you want to present a story?
Well, I thought it was interesting when Allan was talking about their motivation is to look at not just what is a conflict, but what is the resolution. I think probably not enough of that is done. I think you're looking for just what's the fight about. And I think that's kind of, we haven't really stated it that way, but that's kind of what we are looking for as well in so much of what we do, not just the news, but everything that we talk about, is that there's always a solution if you are a believer in Christ. So it's not like a hopeless situation. I think sometimes you have to get through those conflicts because we're having a lot of that now in the Oregon legislature as well as in Washington, D.C. on some of these different issues and all that. But I think keeping in mind that end result of what it is you're trying to accomplish is, of course, the big focus of that. So I would agree with that.
Well, we want to inform people, but it's so easy. If you're not careful, you can get caught up in the fight itself, and that's not the role of a news reporter.
But I think
unless you show the fight to be able to show what the outcome will be as a result of that.
Because I think one of the things that people occasionally throw at Christian broadcasters is that it's sanitized news, and that we're not telling the news as it is because we're always looking for soft, happy, fluffy bunny stories.
Okay.
and I don't think that's true. Like Steve says, I think actually the difference is that we are looking for the positive, but that doesn't mean we don't report the negative, but we are looking for, as we say, a resolution to the conflict.
One of the other things, you Kiwis, you're an imported Kiwi.
Yeah, I'm an imported Kiwi.
Well, no, you're an imported Brit to Kiwi land, so there we go. When we first got together working with UCB on putting the Dove TV on the air, one of the things that kept coming to the surface as we talked to our colleagues there at the UK, over in Australia, and then in New Zealand was, fine, just don't make another Christian television station. Yeah. What was it about Christian TV you guys didn't like?
I think it was,
I mean, be honest.
Yeah, I think one of the dangers is, and I think the way the world sees us, is that we just basically point a camera at a preacher, and so we don't use television. We're just putting effectively a church service on TV, and that's not really using the medium, and that's not attractive to people. I mean, if the idea of Christian TV is to explain to people what the gospel is about and to explain the good news of Jesus to them, then putting a program that's really dull and boring and set back in the 40s isn't going to interest people. What they're used to watching American Idol. I mean, I watched American Idol last night on TV. Yeah. It's glitzy, it's got fantastic production values, it's entertaining, and then they turn over to a Christian TV channel and there's some bloke rattling on, and you think, well, that's not going to attract anybody. So we have to use the methods of secular TV and make it look good and be entertaining and be engaging in order to share the message of Jesus. And when you look at the way Jesus did things, he told stories because that was the medium of the day. He was the American Idol of Palestine in those days because he connected to people in a way that they understood. And I think that's where Christian television sometimes goes wrong. We don't connect in the way that people today understand. And we say, well, look, that's the way we do it. No, that's not the right answer.
I know, Steve, you can respond to that. I want you to do that because, we spent a lot of time in meetings behind the scenes here of trying to be creative and we're very concerned about the production value. I mean, we're doing it with a limited budget, but we're trying hard to make sure the production value is at least matching what our competition is. Not other Christian television. Our competition is secular television. You know.
Yeah.
Well, and Allan and I actually were talking about this whole thing of how we can work better as like-minded Christian programmers to be able to say, what is it that we can bring that's new and fresh? The fact that some of these shows that are so engrossing that you'll see on any TV channel happen another place is a little disconcerting. I think we can create that kind of creative programming too that'll attract people to show them what the gospel is about. Now, we've got a lot of great shows like that, but I'll just be looking forward in the future to how we can kind of collaborate to possibly do more of that with what we have, because we've got great resources here. You know, the people that you have on Focus today, and I'm thinking of so many pastors, I won't start their names, mention their names, but because I'll leave out a few, but they're experts in their field of theology as well. So it's not just preaching, but it's why do we believe this? What is the motivation? How can we influence the culture around us? Those are the types of things I think that'll really be helpful, especially for our audience, and I'm hoping that we can do more with that with Shine TV.
You know, yes, I think the secular media raises the bar on production value, and we need to be very conscientious of that. But at the same time, it appears that the secular media is also creating an opportunity for Christian broadcasting, because the fatigue factor of the arguing and the bickering and the negative news, people are getting wore out by it. And so they'll come to a television, a Christian channel, and say, you know, what's different here?
And we found, sadly, that we were hit by the financial crisis as with everyone else. But for 2 years, we ran a nightly news bulletin, and it's interesting. It took about 6 months for people to realize it was there, and suddenly we found people were coming to us and saying, actually, we prefer to watch Shine TV News on top of TVNZ or TV3, who are our two big networks, because it's not got all that bickering and pointless argument. It actually is just telling the stories as they are, balanced.
I know. And Steve, you were conscientious of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a fascinating thing. What I'm wondering is, when you have, you're in Auckland, of course, the biggest city and all, when you have come and approached some of these people, are you seen as a legitimate news source as some of the other larger networks, or has that been a difficult thing to get through?
We are now. When we first turned up, it was, oh, who are you guys, sort of thing. But we knew we'd made it when we went to a police press conference. It was a major story that was going on, and the cop in charge said, okay, who we got? TV1, TV3, Sky News, Shine TV, yeah, we're all here. And then we knew we'd made it. So
confirmation.
Well, we're waiting for that one to happen. Well, but you know, to me, I see news as the great fishnet. If you can do a quality newscast, you know, with all the elements that we're talking about here, that opens the door to receive a bigger audience than just outside those who are very active with their faith. I think people are looking for another alternative to news, and I think we can provide that.
Yeah, and I think it was the Salvation Army used to say, why should the devil have all the good music? Why should the devil have all the good programs?
Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, and Steve, you spend a lot of time gathering stories, but the way you edit them, to me, is just remarkable. You know?
Well, I mean, it's just what we do. I mean, Shine TV does that as well. When I was, you know, and that was what, 5 years ago now that I was visiting. Wow, time flies when you're having fun. And it was great to see how they kind of set their, I guess you'd say, set their operation into motion, because that's the way to do it. And you guys were not on a huge, heavy budget either, like so many of the other networks that you're competing against. I mean, when you're in a city of 1 million, the bar is pretty high at that point. And I think you guys had done a great job. In fact, finding out how they did things on a shoestring budget, that kind of relates to what we're doing here as well.
Where do you think news is going? I mean, as far as reporting.
You know, we were talking about that, and we were even discussing the aspect of how, since everybody has a camera everywhere, and we can't afford to hire full-time people in the field at different places. Like, we couldn't have a full-time person in Salem or a full-time person in Portland. The question, and we're asking, we don't have the solution, but the question is, how can we utilize, since there are people with cameras and footage and getting the kinds of stuff that we would like to get, how do we cull that to be able to produce that in our own content? And I think this is going to be an ongoing discussion. So, because we're seeing news conferences being covered now with people with iPhones. You know, all right, the visuals are not necessarily as good, but people are forgiving. If you have it, if you have the comment, you have the person saying what they're saying, then it's undeniable, rather than saying, "Oh, Governor Kitzhaber said this."
But everything's visual.
Yeah.
Everything is visual.
I think that's it.
I think with the television broadcasting is one thing, but you take these things, iPads, phones, and YouTube's, everything's visual. I mean, now it's a video world.
Yeah, and I think that people expect to be able to see it now.
And that's incorporated with radio too.
Yeah.
So, the Dove on our website, we want to see the visuals of the story that we covered.
I've seen you guys first thing in the morning. That's not pretty. I'm not sure we want to see that.
Are you incorporating different thinking in how you're gathering news for what you do there?
Yeah, we've looked at 6 years ago, nearly 7 years ago now, when we first started, we spoke to local churches everywhere and said, look, if you have a guy in your church who does video for the church, then let us know. 7 years ago, I don't think we were ready for it, but I think now times have changed, and we're finding that people are coming to us and saying, look, I've got pictures of this. We had, for instance, a tornado came through the North Shore of Auckland. We don't get tornadoes very often, so it was big news for us. But we had people contacting us and saying, "Oh, we've got some pictures if they're any use."
Wow!
And I think that's the way it's going to start to go.
As well as telling the stories of people's lives too.
Yeah. And I think that I suspect is why people maybe are more people would approach us, because they don't think we're going to treat them badly.
Well, Allan, thank you for coming in. Blessings to you. Thank you for what you and Shine TV do to help us here. And hopefully we can reciprocate. And as you do your little travelogue to Cradle Lake today, put it all on film. So we expect to see it on YouTube in about a week, okay?
Yeah, a week? No, don't take that long. I'm a newsman. It'll be up
the reruns in a week.
Okay. Blessing, thanks for coming in. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.